Hello there, and welcome to another teacher training video. I'm Fergus, and on this channel, we talk about all things English language teaching and English language learning as well from time to time. In this video, we're going to look at reading. Now, I do already have a video on teaching reading. Please do go ahead and check that one out. In this one, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the concepts behind why we do what we do in the classroom in order to help our learners improve their reading. So let's, without further ado, jump right into it. So this one is called Tips for a Successful Reading Lesson Plan. And first of all, we're going to talk about, why do we read? What are some of the different reasons for reading? So, when we think about it, sometimes we're looking for some detailed information. If you're reading a course textbook or the phone book or whatever, you're looking for something in detail. Other times you want to just get an overall idea of the text. And by the end of this video, that's the one I'm going to vote for as maybe being the most important in many ways. But some other reasons that we read are, there are times when you just want to read for pleasure, of course, right? Reading a new novel or a biography or anything like that would be reading for pleasure. And, in some cases, the reader is interested in reading things, like trying to figure out what is the author getting at here? So when you read the newspaper, the author may have a slant on it, and you're wondering if that lines up with your perspective on things, for example. So these are just some reasons why we read, and we're going to return to this a little bit later in the video. It's very important for us to understand the reasons why we read, and in a brief way of putting it, because reading needs to be more than just a task that we do with our learners in our class, right? It needs to be something that is useful for them. So those are some reasons why we read. Let's not think about, reading skills and strategies. Good readers, they're skilled because they use reading comprehension strategies. A few years back, Bach said reading strategies are deliberate. They're goal-directed attempts to control and modify the reader's effort to decode text, to understand words, to construct meanings of texts. Reading skills, they're automatic actions that result in decoding and comprehension with speed, efficiency, and fluency, and usually occur without awareness of the components or control involved. So, all of that's saying is really it's quite an automatic process. But we do have these different motives besides just things that we're looking for or the pleasure involved in reading. But what kind of processes are going on in our brains, or really what skills and strategies we're employing, or things like that, trying to decode the meaning of a text, and and to construct the overall sense of what it's all about. So a list of some of the reasons or the comprehension strategies that are used, or skimming. You've most likely all heard of this idea of skimming, and it refers to a process of reading a text quickly to get a general idea of the text. If you're doing a teacher training course, this will often be used interchangeably with the word gist. Reading for gist, or sometimes you might hear skimming for gist or skimming the text. You can get down into the nitty-gritty of this, but in general, these things have roughly the same meaning. When you're planning your lesson, your skimming task, your gist task, that's going to take a shorter amount of time than your more detailed or as we'll see in a moment, the next one, which is actually scanning. And the reason that you'll allocate a bit more time for scanning or reading for detail or specific information, and I know those are seen as slightly different things, but it's reading a text in order to find specific information such as figures or dates or names, and it just requires a more focus and more concentration, so you're going to allow more time for that. Whereas if you allow a shorter amount of time for the just task, it kind of doesn't allow for the learner to get caught in the weeds, as it were, and like really stuck on words. They have to like move on and just get this overall gist of the text. So there are more strategies we can think about. You'll probably hear this term quite a bit, to activate schemata. And really what activating schemata is, it's using background or prior knowledge to understand a text. So according to this kind of schema theory, good readers make sense out of what they read by relating the topic of the passage to what they already know. So I always give an example like this. Imagine you went to a country where not only do you not speak the language, but you use a different script. So a language that I don't speak is Korean, for example, and I know that they don't use the same alphabet, so I couldn't even try and make sense of the words because I just don't know what each symbol means. However, if I open up the newspaper and I see, a photograph of the President of the United States, I can at least exclude that it's not about pop music, or it's not about soccer, for example. It's probably something related with politics. And this is because, I have this knowledge of the world. It's pretty low resolution in my example there. But what am I saying here? This is my schemata that's been activated, or it's kicking in. And we can use this to help learners interpret new texts as well. If you provide some images or a little bit of background or names, etc., it's going to switch on ideas and the schemata that the learner has in their minds already, so that when they go to the text, it's not like they're starting to run completely cold. They're a little bit warmed up, as it were, and it'll help them navigate their way through the text. So along with that, we can then get the learners to make predictions. Once you activate their schemata, you're going to get them to, okay, well, what do you think the text is going to be about? And this is a good idea because it gets the learners, instead of like reading, just taking in all the new information, really what they're doing then is checking their ideas against what they're finding in the text. So they're basically confirming or denying, rather than trying to assimilate and synthesize all entirely new information. Again, this is going to aid both in skimming and scanning and other skills and sub-skills that are used in reading. And in fact, making predictions is a sub-skill in and of itself. So it's really good to get learners, what do you think this text is going to be about? Sometimes I like to write some of their ideas on the board and then just use that as a gist task. Okay, go and read the text and see if your ideas match the general idea of the text, and then get them to compare afterwards and take some whole class feedback. It's a great way of using predictions, and it really personalizes tasks for learners. And along that same idea, you can get them to generate questions. Learners can be guided to think ahead and generate as many questions about the text as possible. So it's just slightly a variation of making predictions. Rather than saying, I think it's going to say this, you could get them to say, well, what question do you think you're going to find the answer too. So maybe, my example about the Korean newspaper could be, who is the president of the United States? Where is he at the moment? What is he doing? Those are just some questions that I think a text with a photograph of that person above the text would most likely answer. Of course, you can push it a little bit more and get a little bit more detail than just who, what, why, where, and when. Although those are a great place to start. Some others then would also include inferring the meaning from context. This is a great vocabulary building sub-skill. There are like 3 types of connections that really could be used. Learners could be encouraged to make connections to themselves, to the world, or to other similar texts to figure out the meaning of language. Linking, and this not to be confused with linker words. What I'm talking about here is linking the learner's reading of the text with what they believe the author's attitude or point of view is another great way of getting learners to develop their reading skills. Also, so moving on from there, we can begin to think about this idea of cognitive processing. And really, the idea is often referred to as top-down and bottom-up. So imagine I say to you, first put a row of 12 boxes down, then on top of that a row of 10 and center it, now a row of 6, then 4, then 2, and finally 1 on the very top. If I asked you, what does this look like line by line, it's hard to know from the outset until bit by bit you get the final picture. It's kind of more laborious. This kind of bottom-up approach relies on the smaller units or bits of text to understand it. These units include the syllables, the words that constitute the building blocks of any passage, the paragraphs, the titles. If the text is a listening text, would it include the phonemes and the rhythm, etc., the intonation? However, you can instantly get a sense of what you're working with if you take a top-down approach. That's why we go for this top-down animation. So I can see right away this is not a circle or an octagon. So it's going to refer to the use of prior knowledge to make sense of what the text is about, instead of depending on the actual words of the text to get the meaning. So if we think about a kind of interactive model, this is going to combine both the advantages of top-down and bottom-up processing. So we're going to think about both of these two things, not as dichotomously opposed, but as working together. So we tend to teach top-down or gist or skimming first, and then zoom in on the detail, as it were. Remember, it's important that your students have the task before they read. It's really crucial, otherwise they won't know what they're looking for. After all, we as I mentioned from the outset, we read for different purposes. Remember, I mentioned sometimes we read for that specific information, or other times we read to get an overall idea of the text, or there are times we just read for pleasure, like novels, etc. Or in some cases, we're interested in reading between the lines, as I mentioned as well. So there's all kinds of purposes for reading. Now, as I said, there's all of these things are important, and we need to develop them in our learners. I would say, if I zoom out a little bit, and if I may get a little bit more philosophical about it, I would say, skimming is really the the skill that long term is probably going to be most useful to learners. Now, from the outset, I'm going to say that I'm not saying that scanning tasks are not useful. They're super useful, and please continue to do them, and absolutely do them on your Celta course. However, just thinking about the usefulness long term to learners, I'd say skimming is more important because the details are only important in a temporary sense, and in your lesson, for example. Anything we do in life, we take a gist and then we make it our own from there. We amalgamate gists into our own detail, if I can put it like that. Often examples or parallels are drawn between what happens in children, and then we kind of like echo out that behavior into adulthood. And you think about kids when they play and they mimic their mothers or fathers, they're rarely, if ever, doing specific or father or mother acts. Rather, they have observed their parents and they're playing out the gist of what they've learned. The same is true of us adults. Think back to your school days or your university days. Do you remember any specifics, or do you remember general principles? I guess, it's going to play a part of, how sharp your memory is. But, even if you have the most photographic memory of all time, remembering every detail in high resolution is not going to come as quickly as remembering the general sense of what you learned in that course or that seminar or that lecture or whatever it was. And do you apply the specifics exactly as your professor pointed them out to you, even if you do remember them in very high detail? Or do you bring them into life with your own unique flavor? Do you amalgamate them and bring in like other ideas than that one idea that you were taught, and do you amalgamate them into your own way of presenting them? So, as I say, you should, of course, still teach skimming and scanning on your course. Absolutely. Pretty much, the vast majority of reading and indeed listening lessons are going to have these as your two sub-skills, skimming and scanning. There are other sub-skills, as I mentioned, inferring meaning from context, inferring the author's attitude, etc. Those are things to work on as well, but especially at the Celta level, skimming, scanning, reading for gist, reading for specific information, these are the tasks that you're going to get your learners to do. You're going to get them to read for gist first, and then you're going to get them to scan. However, I make this point because my reasoning at least gives some weight to the point of view that, gist should come before specifics. After all, if you know where you're going, you have a better chance of getting there. I know that sounds a little bit redundant, but think about it. It kind of makes sense. If you know where you're going, if you have a gist of where you're going, and then, the specifics, the lefts and the rights that you have to take along the way will make a little bit more sense. Okay, so that's it for this video. And so I have plans to make more videos on the topic of reading. We'll have a look at reading tasks, also reading lesson planning. So, to stay up to date with everything on me, please do follow me on all the usual social media. So I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. On Twitter, you can find me at Fergus Teacher. On Facebook, I have a page that's Integrated Skills. On Instagram, you can find me at Integrated Skills ESL. So that's Integrated Skills ESL. And of course, if you're interested in any kind of consultation, you can, of course, email me at fergustrainer@gmail.com. Okay, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please, as always, give it a like, Share it, hit that subscribe button, the bell button, all that good stuff that us YouTubers love. It would be most appreciated. And most of all, please leave a comment below. What do you think about these ideas of skimming, scanning, top down, bottom up processing? Do you teach lessons with any other sub skills? And what has your experience been of teaching reading lessons so far? Okay, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.